Hello and welcome to the Google Cloud Advanced Computing community. Today's session is a fun follow-up to a session we had a few weeks ago. The title is still Quantum Computing Analyst Perspectives on What's Real, What's Needed, and What's Next. I hope you had a chance to check out part one of the conversation. It was great and we got lots of wonderful compliments and feedback about that. It is, of course, posted on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to go back and listen to that when you get a chance. Today's conversation will build on that, but not be dependent on it. So don't worry if you haven't heard that. You're still going to hear lots of great stuff today, and then you can go back and listen to part one. So I want to welcome everybody for joining us. In the US, it's a holiday week. I appreciate everybody for making the time in this short work week when I know everybody's trying to get things done, and of course appreciate all of our viewers from around the world. I'm Jay Boisseau. I am the director of the Google Cloud Advanced Computing community. I'm a longtime high-performance computing expert with 30 years in this and leadership positions at various centers around the country and various companies as well. Most recently, Google, where I am very proudly the product manager overseeing our Google Cloud for Science initiative, as well as several interesting product and solution efforts within it. But I really enjoy leading this community as well, because this is where we bring a lot of passionate people together that want to learn about advanced computing technologies and lots of experts and thought leaders to share their expertise and insights with them, as we'll be doing shortly. So I'm welcoming everybody to the community, but if you're new, let me also tell you what it is. So it is a community of practice. So the primary purpose of this community is to build expertise that accelerates innovation and scientific discovery and productivity. But it's about bringing practitioners together, whatever your role is, from developer to executive to IT admin to user to marketing and sales to outreach, but to bring practitioners of all roles together that are involved in advanced computing technologies. We elevate this expertise in a couple of ways. One is obviously these online sessions that you're tuned into right now if you're watching it live. We do these bi-weekly in general, but we also have in-person events, and those can take different formats. They might be networking receptions designed to foster collaboration, as well as share information. They might be tutorials and workshops, and in the future, they'll take additional formats as well. So when you can attend our events in person, I strongly encourage you, you'll meet other like-minded, smart, curious people in advanced computing. Another thing about this community is it's not just high performance computing, it's really all advanced computing technologies. So we proudly cover high performance computing, large scale data analysis, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, any advanced computing technology that is helping people make discoveries, drive innovation, and increase productivity and efficiency in any kind of application, industrial, government, research, education, and so on. So who is this community for? Well, as I said, it's for practitioners primarily, but that includes Google, our customers, and our partners. So those are our three primary groups, but I want to emphasize it's really for everybody. So we have analysts and media tuning into these. We have potential customers, we have potential partners, and just anyone else interested who wants to learn more about the technologies that we're covering. So we appreciate everybody who tunes into these and who follows up by watching them on YouTube later. We have a website. It's the best way to keep up with things, or I should say it's one of the two best ways. If you opt in for our email, you'll get a once-a-week email that also helps you keep up with things. If you choose not to opt in, though, we have a great website that will also tell you about all of our upcoming events. Of course, you can catch up on all past online sessions through our YouTube channels. We have lots of great content on there already, and we hope that you'll check out one or more of those videos, and then also check out the website for what's coming up in the future. We're about to start the main conversation, so I want to just give all of you a few tips about ways to sort of interact in this conversation. Now, during the presentation part, only the speakers and I will be speaking, but you can use the chat capability in Google Meet to talk to each other. And I strongly encourage you to do that, to introduce yourselves in the chat window. Share something about yourself, where in the world you're connecting from. And if you want people to potentially contact you, maybe share your email address or your LinkedIn link and that link will be live, so people will be able to connect with you right away. So I encourage you to do that. Self-introduce if you wish, but absolutely not required. Chat with other attendees in that window if you wish. If you want to ask questions of the speakers, though, use the Q&A feature. So you go to the bottom right corner, and there's a 9-dot square in the bottom right. You click on that, and then click on Q&A. So the speakers will save all questions till the end. The speakers won't answer them during the presentation, but we also won't see the questions if you ask them in the chat window. Only other attendees will see those. The speakers will answer the ones that I select from the Q&A feature. Finally, I hope you'll use the Meetmojis. It's a fun way to show interest and support and advocacy for different points. And you're seeing some Meetmojis come across the screen now. If you're not sure how to do that, click on the smiley face icon in the bottom center of your screen, and it will pull up a list of Meetmojis that you can use that represent different mindsets, different opinions, different sentiments, I should say. So you can use the plus sign to agree. You can give kudos with a thumbs up, or I guess that's a confetti horn, or you can applaud with the hands clapping, for example, or express surprise with that face that you just saw. Above all, please be respectful of everybody in our community. Be respectful in the chat window. Be respectful of the speakers, and learn, think, and enjoy. And here we go. I'm very happy to start part 2 of Quantum Computing, Analyst Perspectives on what's real, what's needed, and what's next. And joining me again today is Bob Sorensen, Chief Analyst for Quantum Computing at Hyperion Research, and Dr. Bob Sorensen, CEO and founder, and the screen just disappeared, but before I could finish, but reading off of it, it's Sutor Intelligence, right, Bob?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Glad to be back.
Glad to be back. And I should say it's really not necessary to have seen part 1, because I have no memory what I said on part 1. So the risk of repeating myself is you know, imminent. So not to worry.
To evidently rephrase what we might have said last time.
There you go. We could just switch roles or whatever. I'll steal from you with no compunction.
Well, remarkably, I actually do remember what you said, but I can totally relate to that, because one of the things my friends tell me when I repeat a story is they say, Jay, you sometimes forget that you've explained that to us before. They say, on the other hand, it was 100% consistent. You told us the exact same thing again. So kudos, not on your memory, but on your consistency. But I do remember the conversation from before. And so I'm going to try to pick up on it by, there might be a little bit of repeat, because I want to make sure that folks here get some of that reinforced. And in fact, we'll start with a softball question at the beginning that will reinforce some of it. But some of the topics that we're going to get into today, a little bit deeper into applications. And you guys gave some tantalizing foreshadowing for quantum and AI last time. And I really wanted to hear your opinions. I think you kind of gave away the direction of them, but not the content. So I'm looking forward to diving into that today. But let's start with the softball first. Again, how excited are you, or concerned, or skeptical, or optimistic, or whatever? Just give us your current state of sentiment about the field of quantum computing now. And I'll focus now on the hardware progress. We did talk last time about software and services as well, but how are you feeling? What's your temperature right now on the state of quantum computing hardware progress and the path to getting good qubits? Bob Sorensen, how about you go first?
I'm optimistic for several reasons. So a couple of weeks ago, IBM announced their plan to get to a sizable quantum computer. The way I like to look at it is, anybody who's done a roadmap has this hockey stick. And the amusing ones are like, I have 12 qubits, but here's my roadmap to 1 million. And by the way, I have a clear path, right? So there is this hockey stick. And I wrote something last month, and I said, it's fine to have one, but explain what you're going to do, how that's actually going to happen, what's going to come together, because we know that things accumulate and they reach a critical mass, and then you can really start getting serious about this. So what IBM did was to, in fact, publish their plan to get that sort of scaling, which looks exponential, right, where you actually grow. And that's very interesting. And IBM has a very solid record for doing these things, for delivering. I think they have too many birds at this point to keep track of any of them. But they've been quite dependable. And then the other interesting move was IonQ buying Oxford Ionics. So they do ion trap. IonQ's been around for a while, one of the first ones to go public. It's been doing pretty well stock-wise and things like this. But they really did, if not a 180, a 90-degree turn by buying Oxford Ionics, which is a very different way of controlling the ions, which act as qubits in your quantum computers. And not to put words in their mouths, but I will say it looks like they said, the way we were going, that's not going to work. That's not going to scale. They really haven't had very many announcements too recently. The Oxford Ionics approach is much more electronic than photonic in terms of control. So in theory, you can scale a whole lot better. And by the way, they got some incredible scientists along the way with that acquisition. So I think things are starting to come together. My sense is you're getting these important announcements and things are rising a little bit. But there's still way too much hype, if I may, about people who have a handful of qubits and somehow are saying they're going to be amazing. But when you look at the details, solid progress is being made. Bob?
Yeah, the thing I would add to that, and it's interesting because if you'd asked me where we were going to be 5 years ago, I would say there would already start to be a certain amount of coalescing between some particular single or handful of quantum modalities that people would say, look, it's too late. These guys are so far ahead of us that there's no way we can catch up, or it's too expensive to stand up another hardware adventure. And yet it seems that we're not losing modalities, we're still gaining them. That the organizations that a few years ago, like, hey, we want to do photonics, we want to do, spin silicon, we want to try this now. They're not being discouraged by the state of play. They're not saying game over from the hardware perspective. And so to me, that speaks to a degree of optimism, not only from the technology perspective, but also from the inventor perspective. The game isn't over yet. And so there's going to be, I've said this many times before, to me, the most fascinating thing is no clear winner in the quantum realm has emerged yet. Everybody is still in a space where if you look at it at a high enough level of abstraction, everybody's got their own strengths and weaknesses. So again, it's got to speak to the optimism of opportunity here. There's still room for growth. There's still room for exploration. Whether you go back to, an old standby like superconducting trapped ions, to some of the new technologies that get introduced seemingly out of the blue years down the road. I used to say, why would anyone want to compete with some of the entrenched players? And the answer is because we can. And so to me, that gives me a sense of optimism and vitality and just pure innovation out there that sooner or later we're going to find one or more solutions that can address some of the issues that we're talking about, that Bob's talking about, scalability, error correction, all the goodness that gets you to 1 million qubits. Someone's going to come up with one or more solutions to that problem, just because there's no barrier to entry here. I'm shocked at that.
Yeah, it is a pretty tough investment environment, right? If you're out there, you are seeing several people getting Series A's. We've seen a few breakthrough Series C's, and whenever you see Series C or greater, you got to think these people are on the path to go public, right? I think the SPAC market is about to heat up. I've had some conversations with investors about that. And if I may say, just as an aside, and because left to my own devices, I will always get these things messed up. I get very excited about technology and I say, hey, the companies with the best technology should win and become really successful and make a lot of money. And then if you go over the investment side, yeah, you may feel that way, but it's about just that last part about making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, and you constantly see people doing this, like, oh, their stock is so high, they must have incredible technology, right? So for those of us with gray hair, which we were discussing earlier, right, it's the old Betamax, right, versus VHS, right? The best technology doesn't always win. It's a combination of things. So yeah, there's no clear winner. I would say there's probably at the moment a top 5 set of modalities, mm-hmm. The superconducting ions, neutral atoms, photonic, and silicon spin.
Mhm.
And the first and the last are silicon based. And in this industry, you don't bet against silicon as ultimately a winner, right? Just because it's won every other time, right? You know, if no other reason. But I think there'll be several. There are submodalities. So even if we say the word superconducting, you get into at least two dual rail approaches, right? And it's related to errors, right? And so we're seeing some really nice innovations around just fundamentally reducing the number of errors in and around these qubits. And these are what I think will come together. And this is why I think we'll see some more acquisitions. So even though somebody is a superconducting player, they're going to say, hey, those people over there, I can switch to that and do the rest of what I'm doing as well. So I think the Oxford Ionics is just the beginning of this consolidation.
So Bob, let me ask you a question here, because I do this survey every year for the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. It's a market study, and this year we actually had responses from about 82 different quantum computing vendors, hardware, software, professional services, CSP types. And when we asked about public versus private, how they were configured, 80-something% of them came back and said we're still privately held. And for those we asked, when do you intend to go public? And the overwhelming answer was no time very soon.
Yeah.
A lot of them had no plans. Some of them said it's going to be at least 3 or 4 years before we do that. How do you see that as an indicator of where the sector's going? Because you could go through the alphabet and still not become a public company at subsets. There's guys doing in the fusion market. There's guys at series L and M. As fusion's taken so long. So the idea here is this something we should be thinking about? Is this something we should be aware of, or is this a natural phenomena of where the sector stands and where it wants to be, say, in the next 5 years?
I've heard the same thing from these companies. They continue to get private funding, so VC. But in certain places around the world, particularly the UK, there's an awful lot of public funding as well. We've heard announcements, so that there was one last week about this. There's UK Innovates, and these are not small amounts of money by any means, right? So there's this sovereign aspect to many of the companies in countries, right? So France is very strong this way. Germany is very strong this way. I mentioned the UK. The US, let me just say, it's trying to figure out what it's doing. I'll leave it there. And then there are a few other things. Canada, it's very strong. Oh, happy Canada Day to everybody who celebrate or wants to celebrate. Congratulations. So I think they're going to depend on that. And so some of them will come in later. So even if we see some very strong Advantage type results in 3 years, many of these other ones will be coasting through that, because the cliche, not going to be one winner, will be 2 or 3, and maybe in 50 years, none of the above.
So let me get to that point. You said not going to be one winner, maybe 2 or 3. In classical computing, there's clearly one winning modality, right? All chips are, from 50,000 foot view, they're all made the same way. So we did settle on a modality for classical silicon-based computing. There have been a lot of attempts to try to do other things, but as Bob, as you said, your thing, silicon seems to always win in that. In the quantum space, there's a bunch of very different modalities, which I love when my friends ask me about, because I get to show off my quantum physics a little bit and explain to them a bit about elementary particles and things like this. But do you have a feeling that there will be one winner, or do you feel like there's enough momentum behind enough different modalities that there may be 2 or 3 winners? Maybe it'll be more like the era of supercomputing, in which there were MPPs and vector machines for different workloads and large shared memory machines. And while they were all silicon-based, they were still different modalities of supercomputers. Do you feel like that there's probably going to be a few? And I'm going to ask you the fun question after that. If right now you had to put your chips in and you had to rank win, place, and show, you're betting on the Kentucky Derby of modalities, what would you bet on right now if you were forced to on win, place, and show?
I'll let Bob start on that one.
Okay, I'm going to start with your first premise there, which is they settled on silicon. But that's such a high level perception of what it really was, because I am certainly gray beard enough to remember a time where some people said you would never implement logic in CMOS. It's too slow. If you're not running bipolar junction transistors, emitter coupled logic, or in some cases, I remember in the 80s, people were actually building gallium arsenide based systems because of their performance. So even at that gross level of silicon, there was some major battles. We've settled on CMOS for a number of interesting reasons, but it took 40 years to get to that settling stage. And I could see quantum being much the same way. It's going to take some time to settle out. And so, you know, the sector's going to, and like I said, processors were ECL, memory was CMOS. That's the way the world worked. And so you could see an architecture in the future of multiple modalities based on application, power, speed, you know, fidelity, all sorts of interesting aspects where you don't have a single modality in a system. So that's where I'd go there. And to me, you know, the answer is, I don't care which modality wins. I care the ones that have demonstrated performance gains on applications that matter.
I think for another area to consider is AI and inferencing. I mean, you know, it's all von Neumann architecture when you go back, if you're talking about digital, but the chips from Cerebras, from Grok, from NVIDIA, they're very different. And if we want to call each of those a modality, right, we'd see quite a span. And in fact, in that case, I think the GPU is a great big hammer that people are running around trying to hit everything with. And I don't think that's ultimately going to win for inferencing for lots of reasons. It's too power hungry, right? It's not specialized, and so forth. So I think that's probably a pretty good comparison. Also, once again, if we think digital, which is, you know, terrible word here, but binary, they're pretty simple. I mean, zeros and ones. When you start talking about quantums and qubits and quantum states and things like this, it gets way more complicated. And so as we talk about how we're physically representing or borrowing, so representing Josephson junctions, right, the superconducting approaches versus atoms or ions or photons or something like that. So I think there's a long way to go. I don't think there will be one winner. I think there'll be 3 or 4. I think you have to look at the use case, but you also have to look at things like, so certainly performance, but cost of that performance,
right,
the energy usage of that performance. If I am a hedge fund with a lot of money, hey, I want that answer really fast. I don't care how much it costs because I'm going to make 1,000 times as much. If I'm doing something in chemistry and, you know, it takes a while and I get the answer back tomorrow and it's 1/20th the cost, that's fine, right? Or it might have greater accuracy, right? To do these sorts of things takes a little longer, much greater accuracy, such as for chemistry applications, eventually pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. So I think the quantum world will in fact end up being far more heterogeneous than we have seen at this point. But 3 or 4, top 5, you know, I can't really, the ones I like in no order, you know, of course, are the superconducting flavors, but we'll see some consolidation there. Love neutral atoms. Ions have got to prove they can scale. Otherwise, they're just going to have network applications or possibly quantum memory. And they just really have to get, you know, like 1,000. I want to see 1,000 ions all working together. Thank you very much. Photonics, kind of interesting. Some of the approaches are nice, but the ones that are requiring football field size infrastructures for one computer, that's going to take a while. It's a little scary. And then I think the sleeper are the silicon spins, right? It's maybe it's the tortoise and the hare with them. And they're the tortoise, right? You know, they're not moving as quickly. You almost have to think of them as the next generation, right? They're getting going now, but they will bloom in the next generation. I don't know. They have things to prove. So of the 10 modalities, I think 5 of them are extremely viable at this point. I know there are some other people who are doing a few others that believe in their own, but I think we can pick half of them and say, yeah, they got a shot.
I like your point though, Jay, about, you know, silicon is got this massive ecosystem, and anytime you can borrow from the manufacturing supply chain of silicon, as opposed to depending upon complementary gains in things like low-powered lasers and microwave generated detectors and photon generators and such to implement your system. You're depending upon a food chain that may not evolve at the rate that you hope it does. Where in the semiconductor world, we're at 2 nanometer. We've got 50, 60 years of experience in dealing with this stuff. There's a very sophisticated base that can be used and tapped into, predictable performance gains and such. The modalities that depend on subcomponent developments to keep in step with their ultimate vision, there's a much greater risk there in hoping that things will work out that way. So you can't count out those organizations that are like, yeah, we're silicon friendly. That's to me is a major value added in any of those modalities that can take advantage of that ecosystem.
I worked at IBM for centuries. And of course, superconducting, but semiconductors and things like this. And it wasn't until I went to Inflection that I really started learning much more about photonics, right? Mm-hmm. And photonics are kind of a big deal, right? And lasers aren't just reading barcodes or eye surgery, right? Obviously, they're used in telecommunications, but they're used for many, many other types of things. I'd never seen an optical table, right? If you look at what QEver is doing in Inflection, they use these great big, they look like 4x8 tables with all sorts of little gadgets, and they're amazing. But then you say, well, who's doing this? Well, Global Foundries is doing photonics. I live in upstate New York. University of Rochester, the Nanotechnology Center in Albany. There's incredible strength in photonics, which even if it doesn't win on computers, will eventually win on networking, right? Yeah. At least in volume here. We're going to need photonic integrated circuits. The supply chain for actual lasers and many of these things is way too slow. So once that kicks in, and I think it's going to be a little bit slower, and that might be a 2030s thing to really get the packaging down right. But that will really kick off, if you will, a quantum and photonic revolution.
I like that you put the word eventually in there, because those of us who have talked for how many decades about when are we going to move from copper to photons as an interconnect basis. It's been years. It's the same guys that said hard drives are dead. No one's going to use tape. Photonics is right around the corner, and those things have been happening for a while. So if there is an infrastructure to support, classical-based computing networking using photonics, that the quantum world could just slide underneath that and take advantage of that. But if that doesn't take off, I don't know if there's going to be a significant center of gravity or critical mass to make that happen. So the word eventually is a critical point in your analysis there.
So I know you want to talk, but we're not going to.
I was hoping to get to another question.
Right. Well, one thing I want to say is, the Netherlands, a country we discussed a little bit before, is investing $1 billion in photonics. They want to be one of the photonic centers of the world, right? So talk about sovereign efforts. There's one right there, and it's very different. It's public funding. And even in quantum, you look across the board, the Netherlands are exceptionally strong in adjacent technologies and things like this. So it will come up in non-standard ways, right? So I'm hopeful. People like Cisco investing in QNect last few days, that's also, I think, very hopeful to get into this. Jay, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess I'll throw in another question here. Okay. I did actually have an internal bet. I knew that when I asked you to pick win, place, and show, I said, I'm going to ask two analysts this. I'm going to get some great feedback, but I will not get a win, place, or show. And I did not. But Bob, you came close there. You kind of said, well, I sort of bet on these to maybe in some fashion win, place, or show. And I have to say, I agree with the assessment you gave. I've of course, by job, I'm a fan of superconducting qubits as a modality. Through my professional relationships, I think the trapped ion modality is really interesting. Have lots of friends in that space that are doing interesting things, and I appreciated you bringing up the IonQ acquisition and why. as an attempt to scale better. I also got a chance at ISC to talk to the CEO of QERA and was I did not know much about the neutral atom modality before ISC. I just hadn't dug in enough, and I did there, and really impressed by some of the aspects of that as well. But I'm totally in agreement with you. I think it's going to be a while before we see any winners, and I do think that we'll probably go through an extended period of time where there are multiple winners for different reasons for this. But that leads me to the next question. Lately, I've been having conversations with people about the value of having access to simulators and of having access to small scale noisy systems. And I come across two different groups: those who believe providing such access and having such access is important, and those who believe it is too early for that to really be useful for any practical purposes right now, and it's still a ways out. And of course, the people that I hear these things from come from different camps. Some are researchers that are interested in getting a head start on this, or people from incredibly aggressive companies for which cost is not the object, money is the object, and they want to get a competitive advantage very early in this. But plenty of other people on the other side that say, it's good that you're tracking this, it's good to be a part of all this, but it's still maybe too early to worry about incredibly slow simulators or incredibly noisy small scale systems. I have my own view on this, and I'd be curious as to what you two think. And what would you recommend to a company like a Google to doing something like, say, an Azure or an AWS has done? What would you recommend as analysts in terms of providing access to simulators and or current generation small scale noisy systems?
Let me just take a page out of the HPC world. When Department of Energy or any real large, and we just saw it in the Ulick system, whenever they have a planned procurement of a very large system, the first thing they do a couple of years out is build a smaller version of that system. In essence, a simulator. And that's where people start to explore the architecture, test their software, do all the things they need to do to be able to hit the ground running when the full up system becomes readily available. All those things sound vaguely useful. If I'm thinking about a quantum system, the idea of being able to test in a protected environment, sure, it's smaller, sure, it doesn't exactly replicate the exact conditions you're going to see when you have access to a full up system, but it at least gets you down the road. And in fact, if you look at some of the simulators that are out there, some of them are actually on the top 500 list before the actual machine becomes available. So there's certainly within the classical world justification for having access to not a toy system, but one that at least is a controlled environment before you get access to the full up system. And I don't see any harm in being able to provide that kind of capability, whether it be in a simulator or whether it be a smaller quantum system, to at least start to kick the can down the road in verification and validation, testing the limits of the application, understanding where improvements need to be made, and all those sorts of things. So to me, I just don't see a problem with it. The only problem that I see right now is, I'm being impolite here, so forgive me, is if one particular company in the classical world decides that they're going to take over the entire quantum simulator market and drive the sector in one particular direction. I hope that doesn't happen, where all of a sudden everybody's going towards a GPU-based simulator that is defined as, I mean, quite frankly, an NVIDIA issue. And to me, that worries me a little bit, because NVIDIA has the capability to drive trajectories and directions that may not be the best way to go. So I love simulators. That QED study I did, we asked about the validity of simulators in the next few years, and we saw a huge increase from last year's issue of, yes, simulators are going to become more important. And it was because we said CPUs or GPUs, and GPUs came in at double the potential of what CPU-based simulators were. So there's already been an awareness in the sector that simulators, from a software development standpoint, are a good thing. Well, I think we just need to be careful that the simulators are actually viable and valuable simulators of what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I think, well, first, to separate out, the word simulate is used in at least two different contexts with quantum. Mm-hmm. The one we're not talking about is to simulate quantum phenomena, right? So chemical reaction, we happen to do that. We're talking about using classical means to somehow
Yes.
pretend to be a quantum computer. If you look at most books, including my own, and you look at circuits and qubits and things like this, boy, those are amazingly perfect, right? You know, the qubits in the books. You put a quantum value in there somehow by computation or otherwise, and you go away for 5 years and it's still there, right? So this is one form of simulation. You know, it's the perfect qubit, maybe logical or whatever. And this is very general. And in many papers have been written where you thought that they were using quantum computers. They were actually just using simulators.
Mm-hmm.
Simulators like this of a general purpose usually run out of space, 30, 40 qubits. There are a few special purpose ones that can go higher. And if you have one circuit, one problem in mind, you can do optimizations and go much higher than this. It's just a space size. Then there's a question of accuracy, because if you're actually going to numerical values, your errors are going to creep in. This is just straight numerical analysis. If you're doing a lot of things with floating point numbers, right, errors can creep into them. And so it has nothing to do with quantum whatsoever. It's how well you're coding your simulator, and you're aware of this, and you darn well better have somebody who knows numerical analysis writing these sorts of things. And this is built in to some of the GPUs and more advanced processors and whatever. The emulators, which are the simulators but with noise models, those are the ones that try to act as much like the physical devices as possible. I think the audience for those is much, much, much smaller, right? You know, honestly, I want to run a quantum circuit. I don't want to worry about this extra stuff and static and noise and things like I'm having enough trouble writing the circuit and the algorithm to worry about what's going on. I don't want, you know, you better come up with error correction, fault tolerance, right? And after that point, there will be the high priests and priestesses who are under the covers worrying about these types of things, just like there are relatively few number of people who worry about the innards of machine code, right? In classical processors. So all this stuff, which seems so front and center now, will be not a joke, but amusing. It's like, we worried about that stuff, you know, way back when, you know, in the 2020s. The general purpose simulators, as I said, some are better than others. I assigned one for a graduate seminar I taught. There are dozens of them around. IBM has some good ones. Google has a good one. NVIDIA has very good ones as well. And just since I mentioned Google here at the end, you know, Jay, Google Quantum AI gave a ton of money to QEra. You know, this neutral atom. It wasn't just interest, a lot of money. So, Jay, what's happening with Google?
All right,
Covering your pets here?
Question.
No?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak on that one, but I'm not opposed to it either, because like I said, I met the CEO of QEra at ISC and was very, very impressed with the CEO and very impressed with his description of the modality. And I mean, it does go back to something Bob Sorensen taught me, I think 3 years ago now, which is he loves being in the quantum market. And they have two things in common. First of all, everybody in the quantum industry believes quantum is the future. Also, everybody at a quantum company believes theirs is the only right way of doing quantum computing. I love that characterization, and it's still true. Anytime I talk to somebody of a different modality, they are happy to share why their modality is the one that will scale and have the best qubits, and why the others won't, and what challenges the others are going to come up against, which is why they picked the method they did. And I love that. But so I think what I'm getting is both of you agree in the value, at least to some customers and researchers, of providing simulators now. Even providing access to small scale systems now, so people can begin to get experience, provide feedback along the way in making these. And great. So last question of the session, and it gets to the tantalizing end of the previous podcast, our previous YouTube and an online session we did, is about quantum and AI. So this is another area where I'm seeing strongly opposing opinions, just like I did on the value of simulators and noisy small systems now. So I'm getting very strongly opposed things, and I think both parties are right, but that means that one of the parties is right, and they do need access to simulators and small scale systems. In this one, though, I suspect you have possibly a more definitive answer. at least on the state of AI now. I'd love for you to share with our listeners your view on whether you think quantum computing has any near-term, and define near however you want, obviously with systems with lots of good qubits is the minimum definition of it, but for really advancing AI, or you think that the other limitations of quantum systems and the way that we do AI now mean that quantum's not going to really have a strong impact on accelerating AI. So take it away, Bobs.
This is one area where a lot of simulators have been used. It's one of the things with a classical simulator, particularly loading it with data. And again, even if you're restricting yourself 30, 35 qubits, you can take your time loading classical data. At worst, it's an exponential process, but you've got no quantum decoherence going on in these classical simulators. So you can load up the data and then, hey, look at my amazing algorithm for, which some of these results are like, hey, it's almost as good as what we can do classically. Win. Okay. I think there are some parts. I think the things that depend on variational approaches, I think it's interesting research. I don't think it's going to go anywhere in the long run. I think once we have error correction and get these logical qubits, those are the algorithms that will win. Now, the reason why they're using simulators, particularly with these small and noisy, is you just cannot put much data into these systems. Mm-hmm. So you are looking at toy problems with toy amounts of data and then extrapolating wildly from this, right? And so you certainly, with any of these approaches, want to say, am I going in the right direction? Does this look promising? Am I getting hints? Am I smart enough at this point, right? And things like this. And I think this is where the industry has jumped way too far ahead of itself. Sometimes to get funding, right? Or to get a little, PR around what you're doing. And in this case, the first step, which is loading a sufficient amount of data into the machine to do something valuable, just happens to be impossible. So people say, look at my step 2. Isn't this amazing? It's a groundbreaking breakthrough innovation, except that step 1 is impossible, right? But we don't want to talk about that. So this is where the problem is. Now, I do think that there are some areas like kernel methods that are very interesting, right? So where you're actually, the results of what comes out, the parameters that come out will be used classically. So I think that's there. And I think when people are looking at quantum for machine learning in very specific cases, so when we're talking about chemistry, right? Or some of the optimization types of problems, that has great value because the classical algorithms are well understood, right? And you can see the difference. You can get this sense of, are we on the right track? And it's valuable research today. But frankly, I'm so sick and tired of buzzword collision here with quantum and AI on the cloud, with blockchain, why not? And social and Web3. Let's pile on. So there is solid work, but 2/3 of it is hype.
So I let me just add to that, because Bob and I agree on this completely. Coming back from ISC and in the last year or so, we've been really trying to figure out what AI means to the HPC world. And even there, where you're existing in a classical environment, which has 2 orders of magnitude less complexity than AI and quantum computing, it still hasn't made a significant advance in classical HPC workloads. And the phrase that I heard at ISC, which I love, is that AI is grease and glue for the HPC world. Grease in that it makes certain jobs easier. If I've got a pipeline of jobs, the output of one simulation leads into the input of another. The ability to manage that in an AI environment, make sure the data lines up and all sorts of things are happening in a nice seamless manner to remove the onus of the programmer or the subject matter expert to glue that process together. And grease makes things like processing data, doing things that are ancillary or additional to HPC, but don't cannibalize HPC as much. It is a productivity enhancer. The idea of having a classic mod sim thing over here and having a digital AI-based twin over here and trading back and forth insights based on those two things. That's wonderful. But we haven't even really seen AI drive into the classical mod sim world that's, stock and trade of HPC. And I think we're going to see much the same kind of reaction in the quantum computing world. It's going to be a grease and glue phenomena that sits at the input and the output of a quantum system. It may help you think about, what's the best data set to plug into this particular thing, or what kind of analysis can I do if I'm running a particular iterative quantum classical hybrid algorithm. But I think it's going to sit at the endpoints as a productivity enhancer. It's not going to be driven into the kinds of applications that I think a lot of people like to think it is, that all of a sudden you're going to be doing, high speed, chat GPT like training inside a quantum system. To me, that's a ridiculous. It's a ridiculous way. The I/O is the critical element there. It's not. There's no complexity in the computation. It's all about I/O capability, and that's the exact opposite of quantum's advantage. So grease and glue. Look for it in a QC store near you.
Well, Bob, we are longtime friends, and we're going to have a fun debate over drinks sometime about AI's impact in HPC. And I'm going to say Exhibit A is AlphaFold 3, and Exhibit B,
which AlphaFold is a wonderfully smart search engine.
But it is making scientific impact in an area that was traditionally mod sim oriented.
Again, large language model text-based search capability. It's not replacing computational fluid dynamics, finite element analysis, Monte Carlo simulations. It's a really good search engine.
So the scientific benefits of it, though, still speak for themselves. It's not doing things the same way. Same with WeatherNext, and not just Google's WeatherNext, Microsoft's Aurora, NVIDIA's Forecast, etc., are able to do things with the performance that mod sim methods cannot match in weather forecasting, and they can match the mod sim methods in accuracy. And of course, that's partly a function of imprecise initial conditions, nonlinear dynamics, and all these other limitations on mod sim methods. But anyway, that is a topic for another session. I'm going to get you on that session as well, so we can have some fun with that.
Don't invite me. Thank you.
don't invite Bob Sutor, invite Bob Sorensen. Got it.
That's right.
All right. So with that, we have some questions that from the attendees that I want to ask here. Let me scroll through these and figure out the right order I want to ask them in. I'm going to ask this one from Roman Molina first. Hi, Bob Sutor. On the IBM roadmap, the number of gates, an interesting measure, is increasing by roughly square root 2 every year from 5K 2025 to 15K 2028. So far, so exponential and good. And then it goes to 100 million within a year, 2029. That is 4 orders of magnitude in 1 year. How? Thanks. I don't actually remember if those are the right numbers, but Bob is someone who watches these roadmaps and is sometimes appalled by the extrapolations. Are those the right numbers, first of all? And do you think that IBM got overly optimistic towards the end of their roadmap?
I'd have to look it up. I mean,
I don't think that's the qubit count. They're not talking about qubit count there.
No,
I thought they were talking
gates.
about it's total gate area.
So when we talk about quantum computing, I mean, there are many specs. When we talk about qubits, we're talking about the so-called breadth of it. Right? So how many units of information can we actually bring in? And this is when we say, well, when we add a qubit, we multiply by 2 the number of the amount of information we can store. When we talk about gates and we talk about depth, we're talking about how many operations, let's say one after another, we can do. And there's some fine points about how you define this. When we're talking about Shor's algorithm, when it breaks, when we can break, however many qubits you have, you're going to have millions of operations. So if I can only do 100 operations and then the errors just overtake what I'm doing, so whether it's quantum errors, decoherence, errors in the operations or whatever, basically what I got is garbage, right? You got a problem. So it makes no difference if you have 1 million qubits, but you can only do 100 operations on them. So you have to, as you go along, increase the number of gates you can do and do well. It's not just doing them, it's doing them well and keeping the errors under control. We're going to need error correction really to do a lot of this because it's just a question of time and coherence, and anybody, any way you do it, you know, it's going to take long enough and bad things will happen. So I think baked into what IBM is talking about is we will have error correction. And with this error correction, we can decrease the effective errors significantly. So therefore, the physical decoherence will have less of an effect, and therefore, that's what will rapidly increase the number of the logical circuit depth, not just logical qubits, logical circuit depth. So it's a good plan. Lots of things have to come together to do it, but that's how people are planning this. We have always talked too much about number of qubits from day one. People need to look much more at circuit depth, and you probably want it to be 10 to 100 times the number of qubits you have.
Bob, how much do you think that estimate is based on the idea of a modular architecture, that, you know, it's really more about IBM's ability to plug together a number of quantum processing units, and that's where you get those numbers from? I mean, that to me is an interesting solution to all this. It scales the way classical machines scale.
Well, it increases the number of qubits. Now they have to be connected, and they're doing microwave networking between them, so that's good, right? Basically, you have one QPU sitting in one device in one module, right? And then you have another one. Somehow you have to make them talk to each other. Well, okay, how are you going to do this? They can use microwaves to a point, right? How many connections do you need, right? So the connectivity architecture now comes into play again. What's the fidelity of that? Classically, it's gotten worse. IBM seems to feel that they can control it. But that of and by itself is still just a qubit story. It's not a depth story, right? So modular architectures may give you more qubits, therefore you can do more error correction and therefore control it. So it's a kind of an indirect thing. So it will help, but it comes from scaling at high fidelities that then allows you to do more operation.
All right. We have time for one more question if we are concise on the answer, because I have a few final slides, and I want to announce the next session, which I hope everybody is going to tune into, because it's going to be AI tools for scientific productivity. And I'll talk more about that coming up. But let's see if we can get one more question in here with answers from each of you. It was addressed to Bob Sutor, but I want to make sure you both get a chance to answer. He says, Bob, in your newsletter today, you mentioned that future data centers will be quantumly and classically networked. What key architectural abstraction do we need to agree on to integrate quantum processors into the data center stack rather than treating them as isolated projects? And that's from Joshua Williams.
Hi, Joshua. I thought you were going to ask about the word quantumly. That's an old Jay Gambetta of IBM Quantum World. Eventually, these things have to be plug and play. Right, eventually it's going to have to look like you bolted on an interface unit on the side of your quantum device, be it a computer, be it storage. And I've learned, by the way, to say storage, not memory, because it has another meaning there, right? It could be a sensor, it could be other things like this, and then you plug in, and then in the middle there's some sort of network in quantum world there. So there's going to have to be, just now, there are many standards for classical networking, right? Eventually we will get them for quantum. Right now, it's way too early. One area I would like to, I think we should watch, and turn this over to Bob on this, is the HPC quantum integration, particularly in data centers. That's going to be first, because people don't use quantum for trivial problems. It tends to be in the neighborhood of HPC. So this integration is, I think, we'll see the first benefits. So, Bob?
I mean, go back to classical world. In the old days, when you bought a Cray, you had to have a front-end interface to talk to your general purpose IBM mainframe farm. And so, you know, we're going to see the same thing again. There's going to be an intermediate stage where something is going to have to sit in the middle to do the translations, but that will ultimately be subsumed, either the front end of the quantum processor or some small server sitting in the data center that's going to handle protocols and such. We're used to. The IT world is used to plugging things together of disparate protocols and standards and such. Yeah. It's a trivial operation once a standard comes out, or if a de facto standard comes out. So it'll happen. And I don't see it as a significant technology roadblock in any sense. Now, knitting the software together is an entirely different story and much more complicated. I think is going to cause a lot more sleepless nights in the data center than it is making sure that all the pins and the plugs match up.
Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, this is a tractable problem. This is a software engineering problem. Independence Day is coming up. It will probably not happen as quickly as Jeff Goldblum was able to make a Macintosh hack the alien computers in the movie Independence Day.
I always hated that.
Was very impressed by how quickly he could do that. And I was thinking, we can't even make Macs and Windows talk together in that era, but he could hack the alien network. But yeah, that's a tractable problem. So Joshua, great question. But I think that is one that is going to be a software development engineering one. That's all the questions we have time for today. I want to thank you two again for being part of this. We're going to publicize this widely on YouTube because we know our attendance was hit by Independence Day holiday travel in the US at least. So I'll ask you guys, I'll tag you when we start promoting it and ask you guys to share it as well. Great conversation today. Mary, if you could bring the final slides back up, we'll make a few, there we go, a few quick announcements. We have some upcoming sessions. On July 15th, we're going to talk about Google's suite of AI tools. It's going to be a very big picture view of those, but what we really want to end with is two important ones called Co-Scientist and Alpha Evolve. And in no sense do we mean that there aren't alternatives to these tools and other approaches and other products or pathways to producing similar products. But we want to show you the importance of using agent-based systems for idea generation and for evolving code to get to optimal algorithms. So we'll give you a big picture view of the potentially confusing landscape, make it all make sense, but strictly from a scientific and technical computing perspective. There'll be no discussion of, you know, using AI in Google Meet or Workspace. It's really going to be about how AI tools can enhance scientists and scientific and technical programmers. On July 29th, we're going to talk about AlphaFold 3 as an example of an AI-powered domain science application and how it does things in a different way and what those AI benefits can be computationally, performance-wise, accuracy, et cetera. And of course, there's some trade-offs there as well. So we'll talk about that also. So we hope you'll tune in for those sessions. They're going to be two great sessions. I'll be doing July 15th with Vladimir Vuskovic from our AI product management and engineering group overall in Google Cloud. So look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks and then again in 4 weeks for the AlphaFold 3 one. Thanks, everybody. I think we have one more slide here, Mary. Yeah, I want to make sure that everybody checks out our website, sorry. And also big thanks to the team that puts this together. We have a wonderful team that makes these activities possible, brings them to you every couple of weeks, and also plans great in-person events. We had a couple of wonderful in-person events at the ISC conference, and we're busy thinking about what the next opportunities will be to bring folks together in person for real-time information sharing and collaboration and forming new partnerships. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you have a great week. If you're taking some holiday time this week in the US, have a wonderful and safe holiday weekend. Thanks, everyone.